The 1980s 42nd Street wasn't the neon wonderland we know today. It was chaos. Drugs, gang activity, and desperation pulsed through the heart of Times Square. Tourists were warned not to go. Locals avoided it altogether. Rolling Stone called it the sleaziest block in America, and they weren't exaggerating. But behind the grime and broken windows, a quiet war was brewing, a fight to save the soul of New York City. And what followed was one of the most radical urban transformations in modern history. Today, we're diving into 15 moments that changed 42nd Street, forever. The battles, the breakthroughs, and the unlikely heroes who turned hell into a global landmark. In 1981, Rolling Stone magazine dubbed 42nd Street between Times Square and Port Authority the sleaziest block in America. It wasn't just a dramatic headline, it was the raw truth. Beneath the flickering neon signs and XX theaters, the area was drowning in crime, addiction, and despair. Pimps, hustlers, drug dealers, and con artists shared the sidewalks with lost tourists and desperate runaways. Even with a heavy police presence, nothing felt safe. Scams and assaults happened in broad daylight. Visitors were relieved of their cash through charm, coercion, or straight-up violence. For many, 42nd Street had become a symbol of everything wrong with New York City, a place where the system had given up and the streets had taken over. Back then, Bryant Park wasn't a park, it was a warning. Nestled behind the New York Public Library, it had become a hotspot for open drug dealing, violence, and prostitution. Even the NYPD avoided patrolling it alone. Officers arrested users and dealers by the dozen, but as soon as they left, the activity surged back. It was a revolving door of disorder. But Bryant Park also became the testing ground for something bigger. Urbanists, real estate leaders, and city officials realized that if they could reclaim this space, they could apply the same model to the rest of Midtown. The fight to save Bryant Park wasn't just about green space, it was about proving New York wasn't beyond saving. The turnaround began when the Rockefellers stepped in. In 1980, they helped create the Bryant Park Restoration Corporation, a bold, privately funded effort to reclaim the park through strategic design, ongoing maintenance, and strict public behavior standards. It wasn't charity. It was strategic urban philanthropy aimed at protecting their city and their investments. With time, plants replaced needles, public programming replaced panhandling, and crime dropped. The park's rebirth proved that even in the worst conditions, beauty and order could be engineered. Bryant Park wasn't just cleaned up, it became a template for reclaiming New York's most broken spaces, one block at a time. In a city struggling to manage its own decay, business improvement districts, BIDs, emerged as a radical idea. Let private stakeholders take responsibility for public space. Property owners, business leaders, and developers pooled resources to clean up, maintain, and patrol areas the city had all but abandoned. In Times Square, where entire office towers stood empty and hotels were going bankrupt, this wasn't just an experiment, it was survival. By 1992, the Times Square BID had launched with a $6.5 million annual budget, 50 public safety officers, and 55 sanitation workers. This wasn't just about scrubbing sidewalks, it was about restoring confidence. BIDs signaled to the public and to investors that someone was finally taking control. What started as an article in The Atlantic became one of the most influential urban strategies of the 1990s. The broken windows theory, developed by Kelling and Wilson, argued that visible signs of disorder, graffiti, loitering, petty crime invited larger crimes and public fear. In Midtown, this theory was put into practice, block by block. From Bryant Park to the Port Authority, police and security forces began cracking down on minor infractions. Loud radios, spitting, harassment, public smoking. Critics called it aggressive. Supporters called it common sense. Either way, it worked. People started to return. Businesses reopened, and a forgotten part of Manhattan began to feel like a city again. In the early 90s, walking into the Port Authority bus terminal felt like stepping into a collapsed system. People were living above the bus gates, smoking crack, then robbing passengers below to buy more. The bathrooms were dangerous. The air reeked. You could see bodies on the floor at 2 a.m., some high, some dead. But behind the scenes, a quiet transformation began. Under manager Ken Filmus, Port Authority stopped looking the other way. Lighting was fixed. Sightlines were opened. Cleaning crews were reorganized. Bathrooms were repainted, ventilated, and made usable again. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't overnight, but slowly, the chaos began to lift. Instead of pushing the homeless out with force, Operation Alternative approached them with something new: help. A team of officers and social workers swept the stairwells daily, offering beds, food, and services before resorting to arrests. If someone refused help, they were removed. But if they accepted it, they got a second chance, and in some cases, a job. It was a different kind of policing. Less brute force, more accountability. 2 of the first men brought in through the program eventually became supervisors, cleaning the very streets where they once slept. Operation Alternative didn't just reduce crime, it rebuilt lives, and it proved that control and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Before crime dropped, before new regulations took hold, something had to feel different. One of the most underrated but powerful tools in the revival of places like the Port Authority was simple: cleaning. Human waste, cracked vials, broken light set all sent the same message: no one cares. And that message attracted chaos. So the approach was methodical. Bathrooms were painted and ventilated. Barriers were installed between urinals to restore privacy. Cleaning schedules were redesigned so crews could actually reach the floors now clear of sleeping bodies. These weren't just cosmetic fixes. They told commuters, workers, and even the most hardened skeptics, this place matters again. Daniel Biederman had a vision for Bryant Park, and it started with standards. Not vague ideals, clear, everyday rules that quietly reshape the space. No loud radios, no spitting, no cursing. No harassing women, no smoking, no feeding pigeons, no putting kids on dangerous ledges. It was part etiquette, part enforcement, and totally revolutionary at the time. These rules formed a kind of mini-constitution for the park, not enforced with brute authority, but with consistency and presence. It wasn't about policing it was about setting the tone, and it worked. People followed the rules, felt safer, and came back. Bryant Park didn't just look better, it felt different, more civilized, more human. By 1992, Times Square was still grimy, and tense but change was underway. The Times Square BID launched with a bold mission: make the area clean, safe, and friendly. That meant boots on the ground public safety officers, sanitation teams, outreach programs. But it also meant managing perception. Tourists feared Times Square. Locals mocked it. Investors ran from it. The BID pushed back hard. Security booths were opened. Officers were trained to help, not harass. Lights were installed on dark side streets. And, perhaps most importantly, they told a new story relentlessly. In the press, on late-night television, on street corners, Times Square is changing. It's coming back. As Times Square grew cleaner and safer, critics began sneering at what they called its Disneyification. To them, the soul of New York was being scrubbed away, replaced by tourists, chain stores, and safe corporate gloss. But those inside the BID saw it differently. They weren't replacing the city, they were rescuing it. Leaders like Gretchen Dykstra rejected the idea that safety and character couldn't coexist. The goal was never to erase the grit, but to remove the threat. People didn't want Times Square to be suburban, they just didn't want it to be a war zone. And in her words, if the biggest complaint now is that it's too crowded, that's a win. In the battle for 42nd Street and Times Square, changing reality wasn't enough. The public had to believe it was changing. That meant going beyond policy and policing. It meant marketing. The Times Square BID and its allies launched a relentless communication campaign telling anyone who would listen, "It's safe now, come back." They used press coverage, late-night appearances, even a security booth that ended up on David Letterman. Every story, every quote, every interview was part of a strategy. Reclaim the narrative. In a city obsessed with reputation, Perception was power and they weaponized it to bring people back. Forget the superhero cop on every corner. What really kept crime down, according to routine activity theory, was something much simpler: the presence of ordinary people paying attention. The theory said crimes happened when three things converged: an offender, a target, and the absence of a guardian. New York's cleanup took that idea literally. They flooded public spaces with guardians, not just police, but sanitation workers, safety officers, even office workers on lunch break. With fewer easy targets and more eyes watching, the city began to defend itself. Quietly, constantly, order returned, not through force but through design. While politicians made speeches and critics debated policy, Ken Filmus just got to work. As manager of the Port Authority bus terminal, he inherited a disaster zone. Crack vials, human waste, predators, despair. But instead of issuing bold proclamations, he did something rare. He listened, fixed what was broken, and stayed invisible. He changed pedestrian flows, sealed emergency doors, improved bathrooms, added lighting, and redesigned cleaning systems. He coordinated with police, nonprofits, and social workers without ever chasing credit. Filmus didn't sell a vision, he delivered it. Quietly, systematically, and permanently. In the 1980s, 42nd Street was synonymous with failure. By the late 90s, people had a new complaint: it was too crowded. That irony wasn't lost on those who fought to save it. Times Square had gone from an international warning to an international attraction. Not just reborn, but popular. 3 bankrupt towers were now filled. Crime plummeted. Foot traffic soared. Visitors stopped avoiding the blockhand, started lining up for photos. It was messy, commercial, chaotic, in new ways, but it was alive. And in a city like New York, that's the ultimate redemption. So, did you know this was the story behind 42nd Street and Times Square? What once was chaos, crime, and collapse became one of the boldest urban transformations in modern history. But now, decades later, some of the same issues are creeping back in homelessness, public disorder, fear. It raises the question: was the evolution of this place truly a success, or just a pause in a longer cycle? We'd love to hear what you think. Did the city get it right? Or did it something along the way? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this story eye-opening, give the video a like and subscribe to help us keep bringing this kind of content to life.